Most people think Romania is just the land of Dracula. But if that's all you know, you're missing one of the most fascinating and mysterious regions in Europe. Because hidden behind that stereotype is a country of vast wilderness, strange geological phenomena, and centuries-old traditions that have survived almost untouched by time. Before exploring the most fascinating places across Romania, there are several surprising facts about this country that explain why it feels so different from the rest of Europe. And one of those facts might completely change the way you see this region. One of the first things that makes Romania so unusual is its geography. At the center of the country rises a vast mountain arc known as the Carpathians. These mountains stretch for roughly 1,500 kilometers, almost 930 miles, across Central and Eastern Europe, and Romania contains the largest portion of them. But what makes this region truly remarkable isn't just the mountains themselves, it's what still lives inside them. Romania is home to some of the largest populations of wild animals left anywhere in Europe. Thousands of brown bears roam these forests, along with wolves and lynx, species that disappeared from much of the continent centuries ago. In fact, Romania is believed to contain more brown bears than all other European countries combined. And the reason for that goes back to something surprising. Unlike much of Western Europe, huge areas of Romania remained heavily forested and sparsely populated for centuries. Today, about 29% of the country is still covered in forest. That's roughly 238,000 square kilometers, or about 92,000 square miles. Some of those forests are even older than most people realize. Hidden deep in remote valleys are primeval forests that have grown largely undisturbed for thousands of years. Some trees here are estimated to be more than 500 years old, their trunks rising high above thick carpets of moss and fallen leaves. Walking through these forests can feel almost like stepping back in time. But Romania's landscapes hold more than just ancient woods. Beneath the surface, the country hides an entire world of caves and underground formations. Romania has more than 12,000 documented caves. Many of them formed over millions of years as water slowly dissolved layers of limestone beneath the mountains. Some cave systems stretch for dozens of kilometers, over 18 miles, through narrow passages, vast chambers, and underground rivers. And in certain places, the ground itself behaves in ways that seem almost impossible. In eastern Romania, unusual geological formations push cold gases up from deep underground. These gases can create strange bubbling landscapes where the Earth seems almost alive. Elsewhere, natural mineral springs bubble up through the soil, producing waters rich in salts and minerals that have been used for healing since ancient times. But Romania's uniqueness isn't only about nature. It's also about history. For centuries, this region sat at the crossroads between empires: the Roman Empire, the Ottoman Empire, the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and later the Soviet sphere of influence. Each of these powers left behind traces of their culture, architecture, and traditions. Yet despite these influences, Romania developed a surprisingly distinct identity. One of the most unusual aspects of the country is its language. Romanian belongs to the Romance language family, meaning it evolved from Latin just like Italian, Spanish, and French. But geographically, Romania is surrounded almost entirely by Slavic language countries. This makes Romanian something of a linguistic island in Eastern Europe. When you hear it spoken, you might notice familiar Latin words mixed with influences from neighboring cultures. It's a reminder of how complex the region's history really is. And that history has also shaped Romania's villages. In many rural areas, traditions have survived that disappeared elsewhere in Europe long ago. Wooden houses, handmade clothing, and seasonal festivals still play an important role in everyday life. Some villages continue to follow rhythms that have remained almost unchanged for generations. But perhaps the most famous story associated with Romania comes from something far less historical: the legend of Dracula. The story of Dracula was popularized by the Irish writer Bram Stoker in the late 19th century. His novel described a mysterious vampire living somewhere in the mountains of Transylvania. Although the character was fictional, Stoker loosely based parts of the story on a real historical figure: a 15th century ruler named Vlad III, also known as Vlad the Impaler. Over time, the Dracula legend spread around the world and became forever linked with Romania. But the reality behind that story is often very different from the myth. And in one region of Transylvania, there's a castle that became famous precisely because of that legend. Which brings us to the first place on our journey through Romania. High above the forests of Transylvania stands one of the most famous castles in the world. Perched dramatically on a rocky hill about 60 meters, nearly 200 feet above the surrounding valley, Bran Castle has become globally known as the legendary home of Dracula. Its tall towers, narrow windows, and stone walls look exactly like something from a Gothic novel. But the real story behind this castle is more complex than the myth. Bran Castle was first built in 1377 by Saxon settlers to guard an important mountain pass between Transylvania and Wallachia. At the time, this route controlled a major trade corridor linking Central Europe with the Balkans and the Black Sea. Merchants traveling through these mountains had to pass directly beneath the fortress, paying customs taxes while soldiers watched from above. Despite the famous legend, Vlad the Impaler, the ruler often associated with Dracula, probably spent little or no time here at all. His connection to the castle was largely invented later, especially after Bram Stoker's novel turned Transylvania into the world's most famous vampire setting. But just beyond the castle walls rises a landscape that explains why this region of Romania has always felt so mysterious. The hills rise sharply into a rugged mountain plateau known as the Bucegi Mountains, one of the most distinctive ranges in Romania's southern Carpathians. These mountains reach elevations of more than 2,500 meters, about 8,200 feet, and their high plateau is famous for something unusual. Strange rock formations shaped by thousands of years of wind and erosion. Some of these formations have become famous because of their almost human-like shapes. One of the most well-known is a massive rock known as the Sphinx, standing about 8 meters, roughly 26 feet tall. Over time, these unusual shapes have inspired countless local legends. Some stories claim the formations were sacred sites for ancient civilizations. Others suggest they hold hidden chambers buried deep beneath the mountain. But in reality, their origins are entirely natural. Strong winds blowing across the plateau gradually carve the soft sandstone into the shape seen today. Beyond these formations, the Bucegi Mountains are also a gateway to some of the region's most dramatic alpine scenery, with deep valleys, dense forests, and steep ridges attracting hikers and climbers from across Europe. And descending from these mountains leads directly to one of the most important historic cities in Transylvania. At the foot of the mountains lies the historic city of Brașov. Founded in the 13th century by German settlers known as the Transylvanian Saxons, Brașov quickly became one of the most important commercial centers in the region. Its location at the crossroads of several trade routes allowed merchants from Central Europe, the Balkans, and the Ottoman Empire to exchange goods here. Today, the heart of the city is the large central square, known as Piața Sfatului. Colorful Baroque buildings surround the plaza, while outdoor cafes and markets fill the space where traders once gathered centuries ago. One of the city's most famous landmarks stands just above the square, the Black Church. Built in the late 14th century, is the largest Gothic church in Eastern Europe. Its name comes from a fire in 1689 that darkened its stone walls with soot, leaving marks still visible today. And just above the city, perched on a nearby hill, another fortress once stood guard over the entire region. Râșnov Fortress was built in the early 13th century by the Teutonic Knights and later expanded by local Saxon communities who needed protection from repeated invasions. Positioned about 150 meters, nearly 500 feet, above the valley floor, the fortress commanded a clear view of the trade routes passing through the mountains. But what makes this fortress unusual is not only its defensive position. Unlike many castles built for nobles or kings, Râșnov was designed primarily as a refuge for ordinary villagers. During attacks, hundreds of local families could retreat behind its thick stone walls, bringing livestock, food supplies, and tools with them. Inside the fortress, archaeologists have discovered the remains of houses, a school, storage buildings, and even a small chapel. From the fortress walls, sweeping views stretch across the surrounding valleys. And beyond those valleys, the mountains rise dramatically once again. Further west, the Carpathian landscape reaches its most dramatic form. The Făgăraș Mountains are the highest range in Romania, with more than a dozen peaks rising above 2,500 meters, roughly 8,200 feet. The tallest, Moldoveanu Peak, reaches 2,544 meters, or about 8,346 feet, making it the highest point in the country. But what truly defines these mountains is their rugged terrain. Sharp ridgelines stretch for nearly 70 kilometers, about 43 miles, forming a continuous chain of jagged peaks, glacial valleys, and deep alpine lakes carved during the last ice age. Some of these glacial lakes sit high in remote cirques surrounded by steep rock walls. One of the largest, Lake Belay, lies at an altitude of more than 2,000 meters, around 6,500 feet, and remains frozen for much of the winter. The mountains also hide extensive networks of hiking routes that cross exposed ridges and narrow passes. But reaching the heart of this mountain range once posed a serious challenge. Until the 1970s, many of these areas were accessible only by difficult trails. Then, a massive engineering project transformed the mountains forever. Cutting directly through the Făgăraș Mountains is one of the most famous roads in the world. The Transfăgărășan Highway stretches about 90 kilometers, roughly 56 miles, across steep ridges, deep valleys, and high alpine terrain. At its highest point, the road climbs to more than 2,040 meters, or about 6,700 feet above sea level. Construction began in 1970 under the rule of Romanian leader Nicolae Ceausescu. The goal was not tourism, but strategy. After the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1968, Romania wanted a fast military route across the mountains in case of a similar threat. Building the road proved extremely difficult. Thousands of soldiers worked for 4 years blasting tunnels and carving switchbacks directly into the rock. More than 6 million kilograms, about 13 million pounds, of explosives were used during construction. The result is a road filled with dramatic hairpin turns that climb steeply up the mountain slopes before disappearing into a long tunnel beneath the ridge. During summer, drivers and motorcyclists travel here from across Europe to experience the winding route and spectacular scenery. But beyond the highest section of the road lies a much older fortress connected to one of the most infamous rulers in the region's history. Poenari Fortress sits on a narrow ridge about 850 meters, roughly 2,800 feet above sea level, overlooking the Argeș River far below. Unlike many castles built in valleys or towns, this fortress was designed purely for defense. In the 15th century, Vlad III ordered the fortress to be rebuilt and expanded. According to historical accounts, captured prisoners were forced to carry stones up the mountain to strengthen its defenses. From this isolated stronghold, Vlad controlled the surrounding region and monitored the mountain routes that passed through the valley. Today, only fragments of the walls remain, but the location itself explains why the fortress was so effective. From the top, the view stretches across forests, cliffs, and winding rivers deep below. And following that river valley westward eventually leads to one of Transylvania's most elegant historic cities. At the edge of the mountains lies one of the most beautiful historic cities in Romania. Sibiu was founded in the 12th century by German settlers known as the Transylvanian Saxons. Over time, it developed into one of the most important cultural and commercial centers in the region. The city is famous for a distinctive architectural feature. Many of the rooftops in the historic center contain narrow dormer windows shaped like watchful eyes. Locals often refer to them as the Eyes of Sibiu, giving the impression that the city itself is quietly observing the streets below. The heart of Sibiu is divided into two main squares. The large square, or Piazza Mare, has been the city's central gathering place for centuries. Surrounding it are colorful buildings once owned by wealthy merchants and guilds. Nearby, the small square connects to narrow passageways, stone staircases, and defensive towers that formed part of the medieval fortifications. One of the most famous landmarks linking these areas is a narrow iron bridge built in 1859. Known locally as the Bridge of Lies, it has inspired countless legends. One story claims the bridge would collapse if someone standing on it told a lie. Beyond the historic center, roads begin climbing back into the mountains. And one of those routes leads to another spectacular high-altitude drive across the Carpathians. Winding high through the mountains is the highest road in Romania. The Transalpina Highway stretches about 148 kilometers, roughly 92 miles, across the southern Carpathians, reaching an altitude of more than 2,140 meters, or about 7,000 feet above sea level. Parts of the route are believed to date back to ancient times, when Roman legions used mountain paths here to move troops across the region. However, the modern road was largely rebuilt in the 1930s under King Carol II. Later, during the 20th century, the route was expanded and paved, transforming it into one of the most spectacular drives in Eastern Europe. During winter, heavy snow closes much of the road, sometimes covering it with several meters or more than 10 feet of snow. But during summer, the route attracts travelers from across Europe looking to experience the dramatic scenery of the Carpathians. And further west, beyond these mountains, stands one of the largest and most imposing medieval castles in the entire region. Corvin Castle looks almost like something from a medieval fantasy. Massive stone towers rise above high defensive walls, while a long wooden bridge stretches across a deep ravine leading to the main gate. From a distance, the castle's red roofs and tall spires create a silhouette that is instantly recognizable. Construction began in the mid-15th century under the rule of John Hunyadi, one of the most powerful military leaders in the Kingdom of Hungary. Over time, the fortress expanded into a vast complex with more than 40 rooms, large halls, and several defensive towers. But the castle is also surrounded by darker legends. According to one story, Vlad the Impaler was once imprisoned here for several years before eventually regaining power in Wallachia. Historians debate the accuracy of that claim, but the legend has become part of the castle's mystique. Walking through the courtyard today reveals Gothic windows, carved stone balconies, and narrow staircases hidden inside thick walls. Yet beyond this fortress, the landscape changes again, and farther west lies one of Romania's most vibrant historic cities. Timișoara is often called Little Vienna because of its elegant squares and grand buildings influenced by the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Wide boulevards, ornate facades, and lively cafes give the city a distinctly Central European atmosphere. But Timișoara is famous for another reason. In 1884, it became the first city in continental Europe to introduce electric street lighting. More than 700 electric lamps illuminated its streets, transforming the city into a symbol of modern innovation at the time. The historic center revolves around three main squares. Victory Square stretches nearly 300 meters, about 980 feet, between the Orthodox Cathedral and the National Opera House. Today, it is a lively pedestrian area lined with gardens, fountains, and colorful buildings. Nearby, Union Square is surrounded by Baroque palaces painted in shades of yellow, blue, and green. But the city also played a dramatic role in modern history. In December 1989, protests here sparked the Romanian Revolution that ultimately led to the fall of the communist government. Yet beyond the city's lively streets, the terrain begins rising again, and those rising hills lead into a vast landscape of caves, forests, and hidden valleys. Deep in western Romania lies one of the country's most fascinating mountain regions. The Apuseni Mountains are not the tallest in the Carpathian range, but they are among the most geologically complex. Over millions of years, underground rivers carved vast networks of limestone caves beneath these hills. Today, more than 1,500 caves have been discovered here. One of the most famous is the Sighișoara Ice Cave, which hides one of the largest underground glaciers in Europe. Above ground, the landscape is just as remarkable. Rolling hills covered with dense forests hide small villages where traditional wooden houses still stand scattered across the valleys. Hiking trails wind through quiet forests and remote mountain pastures, revealing a side of Romania that feels surprisingly untouched. And beyond these hills lies one of the country's largest and most dynamic cities, built on the edge of this remarkable landscape. Cluj-Napoca is often considered the unofficial capital of Transylvania. With more than 300,000 residents, it has become a major center for culture, technology, and education in the region. But the city's history stretches much further back. More than 2,000 years ago, this area was home to a Roman settlement known as Napoca. Archaeological remains discovered beneath the modern city reveal fragments of ancient roads, walls, and buildings that once stood here during the Roman Empire. Beyond the historic center, the city has become known for its vibrant cultural life. Each summer, festivals such as Untold transform the city into one of Europe's major music destinations, attracting visitors from across the continent. Yet beyond this modern energy, the landscape soon changes again. And further north lies a region where centuries-old wooden structures still define the character of entire villages. In northern Romania, the landscape of Maramureș preserves a remarkable architectural tradition. Scattered across quiet valleys and forested hills stand a series of wooden churches unlike anywhere else in Europe. Built primarily between the 17th and 19th centuries, these structures were constructed almost entirely from timber. But their design is what truly makes them distinctive. The churches feature tall, slender towers that often rise more than 40 meters, about 130 feet, into the sky. Their steep roofs and narrow spires were built this way partly for practical reasons. Heavy winter snow could slide easily from the wooden shingles. Today, several of these churches are recognized as UNESCO World Heritage Sites, preserving a rare example of traditional craftsmanship. In many villages, the churches still serve as gathering places for religious celebrations and community events. The surrounding countryside is filled with wooden gates, traditional houses, and hayfields that have changed little over generations. But among these villages lies a cemetery that approaches remembrance in a very different way. In the village of Săpânța stands one of the most unusual cemeteries in the world. Instead of dark stone monuments and somber inscriptions, the graves here are marked by brightly painted wooden crosses filled with colorful illustrations. Each cross tells a story. The tradition began in the 1930s when a local woodcarver named Stan Ioan Pătraș started creating unique grave markers for villagers. Rather than focusing only on death, his designs celebrated the personality and life of the person buried beneath. Many crosses feature humorous poems, describing how the individual lived, worked, or sometimes even how they died. The bright blue background used on many crosses has become known as Săpânța blue, a color now closely associated with the cemetery's distinctive style. Over time, the site has grown to include more than 800 painted crosses. Visitors walking among them discover a place that reflects a unique perspective on life and death, one that emphasizes memory, humor, and storytelling. Yet beyond these villages, the road continues east toward a dramatic natural passage carved deep through the mountains. In northeastern Romania, the road suddenly enters one of the most dramatic natural corridors in the country. Bicaz, or the Bicaz Gorge, is a narrow canyon carved by the Bicaz River as it slowly cut its way through layers of limestone over millions of years. In some sections, the cliffs rise more than 300 meters, nearly 1,000 feet, straight above the road. Driving through the gorge feels almost surreal. But this gorge is not only impressive for its height. The steep cliffs have become a popular destination for climbers. More than 100 climbing routes have been established here, ranging from relatively accessible faces to extremely challenging vertical walls. The gorge also serves as a gateway between two historic regions of Romania, Transylvania, and Moldavia. But beyond this narrow passage, the landscape opens again, and those surrounding peaks belong to a vast mountain system that shapes much of the country's geography. The Carpathian Mountains extend for about 1,500 kilometers, roughly 930 miles, forming a giant arc that curves through several countries. Romania contains the largest portion of this range, with mountains covering nearly 1/3 of the country. These mountains are incredibly diverse. Some areas feature high alpine ridges and sharp peaks, while others consist of rolling forested hills and wide valleys dotted with small villages. The Carpathians are also known for their wildlife. Large mammals such as brown bears, wolves, and lynx still inhabit these forests in numbers rarely seen elsewhere in Europe. Dense woodland and rugged terrain have allowed many species to survive here long after they disappeared from other regions. Historically, these mountains also served as natural barriers. For centuries, the Carpathians helped define the borders between different kingdoms and empires. Passes through the mountains became crucial trade routes and strategic corridors connecting regions on either side. Today, many travelers explore the area through hiking trails that follow ridgelines, river valleys, and ancient paths once used by shepherds. But eventually, many of those rivers flowing down from the mountains head toward a very different landscape, a vast wetland where one of Europe's great rivers reaches the sea. At the eastern edge of Romania, the Danube River reaches the end of its long journey. After flowing nearly 2,850 kilometers, about 1,770 miles, from its source in Germany's Black Forest, the river spreads out into a vast network of channels, lakes, and wetlands before emptying into the Black Sea. This region is known as the Danube Delta, covering more than 5,800 square kilometers, roughly 2,240 square miles. It is the second largest river delta in Europe and one of the continent's most important natural habitats. The delta is famous for its bird life. More than 300 bird species have been recorded here, including pelicans, herons, and cormorants that gather in large colonies across the wetlands. Because of its ecological importance, much of the delta is now protected as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. But far from these wetlands, in another part of the country, the landscape reveals something completely unexpected. A place where the ground itself seems to bubble and move. The mud volcanoes of Buzău are small geological formations where gas rising from deep underground pushes mud and water to the surface. Instead of molten lava, thick gray mud slowly bubbles up through cracks in the earth. The result is a strange field of miniature cones and craters. Some of these formations reach only a few meters, about 10 to 20 feet, in height, but they constantly change shape as fresh mud flows down their sides and dries under the sun. The bubbling process happens because natural gas trapped beneath layers of clay and sediment forces its way upward. As it escapes, it carries mud with it, creating the slow-motion eruptions that give the site its name. The surrounding terrain appears almost barren. Salt in the soil prevents most plants from growing, leaving a dry, cracked surface that resembles a desert landscape. But Romania's landscapes are full of contrasts. And not far from here stands a castle built for a king that looks as if it came straight from a fairy tale. Hidden in a forested valley in the Carpathian foothills stands one of the most beautiful royal residences in Europe. Peleș Castle was built in the late 19th century as the summer residence of King Carol I of Romania. Construction began in 1873 and continued for several decades as the complex gradually expanded. Unlike medieval fortresses built for defense, Peleș was designed for comfort and elegance. The castle combines several architectural styles, including German Renaissance and Neo-Gothic elements. Decorative towers, carved wooden balconies, and intricate stonework give the building an elaborate appearance. Inside, the castle contains more than 160 rooms, each decorated in a different artistic style. For many visitors, Peleș represents the elegance of Romania's royal era. Yet, beyond these forests, lies a town whose colorful streets reveal a much older story. In the heart of Transylvania stands one of the best-preserved medieval towns in Europe. Sighișoara was founded in the 12th century by German settlers and quickly developed into a fortified trading center. What makes the town remarkable today is how much of that medieval layout has survived. The historic center sits on a hill surrounded by defensive walls and towers built by different craftsmen's guilds. Walking through the cobbled streets reveals pastel-colored houses, narrow passageways, and small squares that feel almost unchanged since the Middle Ages. One of the town's most recognizable landmarks is the clock tower. Standing about 64 meters, roughly 210 feet tall, the tower once served as the main gate into the fortified citadel. Its clock mechanism still controls a set of wooden figurines that mark the hours as they rotate through small windows. Sighișoara is also known as the birthplace of Vlad III, the historical figure often associated with the Dracula legend. Yet, despite its long history, Sighișoara remains a living town where people still reside inside the ancient walls. And the journey across Romania eventually leads to a city that reflects a very different chapter of the country's story. At the end of the journey across Romania lies a city that reveals a completely different side of the country. Bucharest, the capital, is the largest city in Romania and home to more than 1.8 million people. Unlike the medieval towns scattered across Transylvania, Bucharest developed into a modern metropolis shaped by several very different historical periods. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the city earned the nickname Little Paris. Wide boulevards, elegant villas, and grand public buildings were constructed during this era, inspired by the architecture of the French capital. But the city's appearance changed dramatically during the communist period. In the 1980s, the government launched a massive urban redevelopment project that transformed large sections of Bucharest. Entire neighborhoods were demolished to make way for enormous new buildings and broad avenues. The most famous result of this project is the Palace of the Parliament. This immense structure contains more than 1,000 rooms and covers about 365,000 square meters, roughly 3.9 million square feet, making it one of the largest administrative buildings in the world. Today, Bucharest is a city where different eras coexist. Historic churches, grand boulevards, communist architecture, and modern glass towers stand side by side, reflecting the complex history of Romania itself. Romania is a country full of remarkable contrasts. From medieval castles and historic towns to wild mountain landscapes and unusual natural wonders. Each place reveals a different part of its story, and together they create one of the most fascinating destinations in Europe. Thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this journey through Romania.